Hello, I'm property journalist Liz Hamson. Thank you for joining us today for what promises to be a fascinating debate in partnership with Commonplace on how digital platforms and data can be harnessed to modernise planning and engagement. As you all know, several £million from the government's PropTech engagement fund is being spent across England in a bid to make the planning system more open, engaging and accessible. Add to this the fact that the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill has put more power over planning into the hands of local communities and introduced community engagement initiatives such as street votes, and a much brighter future for community engagement and planning surely beckons. But does it, given the myriad challenges the planning system still faces? And that's what we're here to find out today. Today, we will be asking and hopefully answering three key questions. Just how can digital data be harnessed to improve planning? How can it enable better digital engagement? And the big one, can it really help local authorities, which are currently struggling so badly with resourcing issues? Before we get underway, a reminder to everyone watching that in about 30 minutes, there will be an opportunity for you, the audience, to pose your questions. Don't pass up the opportunity to put our expert panelists on the spot. Now, let me introduce our experts. I'm delighted to be joined today by Paul Barton, who's the Interim Head of Planning and Economic Development at Southampton City Council. Mike Saunders, who's the CEO of Commonplace. Cleo Wheedon, who's the Head of Private Sector at Commonplace. And Lucille Watkins-Brazier, who is Head of Social Impact at Lendlease. Okay, let's get this discussion started. So my first question is to Mike. Now, Commonplace describes itself as an online engagement platform that allows you to connect with the whole community, hear their voices, and make better, more inclusive decisions about places. That's great, but how can digital engagement help not just drive local community engagement, but also levelling up ambitions and more forward thinking generally?
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Liz. So, as Liz said, Commonplace is a digital engagement platform, and we've reached over 5.5 million people across more than 1,500 projects. And we sell Commonplace licenses to private sector developers, to local government, and through a wide range of partners as well. And our customers use Commonplace to reduce planning risks, to decrease costs, and they do all of that by proactively engaging communities and using the insight that they collect to make much better decisions and to provide robust evidence. I think that the landscape for engagement in planning has changed dramatically since 2019. COVID saw a huge kind of refocus of interest on neighbourhood. Lots of people had a renewed interest in the places that they were living and wanted to be reconnected to them. The government launched its white paper on digital planning in August 2020. And then, as Liz mentioned, more recently, we've had the Regeneration and Levelling Up Bill. And there's a very, very strong commitment in there to increasing public voice, including greater emphasis on digital planning and data, and also building on the use of design codes as a tool that can be used more widely and is particularly focused or particularly appropriate, I think, and powerful in terms of engaging the public on what might change. And Liz also mentioned the idea of street votes. I think it's probably fair to say that nobody really knows exactly how that might work at the moment, but it could launch a radical new form of local engagement and influence, giving every street potentially in the country a vote on what plans might be accepted in the future.
And what's your gut instinct on that, actually?
I think it's way too early to say. I mean, it is clearly marked in the draft bill, but there's no detail at all on it. So I think it's definitely one to watch. And there's also lots of evidence on the increasing demand from the public for meaningful engagement. We ran a nationwide survey, and we found that the public wants to have much more of a say in the future of their neighbourhood. 76% of people, to be exact, want to have more say. So there's a huge demand there. And people want to be engaged, but not surveyed. It might sound a bit semantic, but actually I think it's really important. What they want is an ongoing conversation, and they want to be kept in the loop They don't want a kind of one-off snap survey.
Can I ask what sort of people are saying that they want to be sort of engaged?
Well, we did a nationwide survey that's representative of the whole population. So it was 76% of that sample. So, you know, it's really, we're talking about everybody here. So digital engagement is not going to replace face-to-face, and nor should it. We believe that really strongly. You know, that face-to-face engagement, like sitting down, having a cup of tea with somebody, is still the richest form of engagement. But there's a limit to the number of cups of tea that you can have, and digital can do many things that sitting down with a cup of tea can't. What are they? Well, reach, I think, is the first one. You know, you can reach 100 times more people with a really good digital engagement platform. Inclusivity, yes, there are people who can't or want or don't want to access digital, but there are also many, many more who won't access other types of face-to-face events. And in particular, in communities where there are younger people, maybe where there are multiple languages spoken, digital can be really, really key. Mobile's crucial for both of these points that I've just mentioned, and we get 75% of our respondents using mobile phones. Trust and friendliness is something that we specialise in at Commonplace, creating a digital experience that's friendly, but also is very, very relevant, feels very, very relevant. It's not a survey, as I've said. It's a conversation. It's snackable, which means that you can consume it in short bursts. It's very visual. It uses 3D, and it does all of this to make it easy and delightful. And the way that digital really stands out, and the focus of this session today is about leveraging data. We collect lots of data, and that benefits all of us because it provides more intelligence. It provides greater ability to interpret information quickly and more robust evidence when you're using a platform like Commonplace to collect it and to analyze it. And you can do all of that without employing an army of Excel experts. So I think that digital engagement in planning is no longer a nice to have, it is a must. There's just too many risks and too many unknowns without it. And the benefits, if you use it well, in terms of managing relationships with the community, improving reputation, reducing risks, and actually marketing the new place to the local community, are huge. And I think Cleo in a moment is going to give some examples about how it works.
I'm loving the fact that you're talking about we should move away from cups of tea to snackable.
Not moving away from cups of tea. We need to keep the cups of tea.
Okay. But add snacks.
But add snacks. Yeah.
I'm with you now. Okay, Cleo, obviously we've just heard there how this is working in sort of theory. What about the practice? How does it work on the ground? How can local authorities and developers collaborate to engage much more effectively with public on planning?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, obviously, Mike's given a bit of a backdrop of how this is occurring. And we had a couple of slides. I'm not sure. Oh, there we are. They're coming up. Because as Mike mentioned, so much of what we do at Commonplace in terms of the digital engagement is about it being visual and engaging. So in light of that, we thought a couple of slides to illustrate a few things might be helpful at this point. So these are some of the numbers that Mike talked about, but I think it's just really interesting to see this spread of respondents across the whole country. And of all of those people that have engaged with a Commonplace platform engagement, 87% of them want to hear more about what's going on in their neighbourhood. So that's really interesting. So, you know, not only have they taken the time to engage in the first place, to leave a comment or to comment on someone else in their community's thoughts on what's happening in their local area, but they have told us that they want to keep hearing about what's going on. So that is that open conversation, like that is that line into the community right there. If we just flick on to the next slide. So a really great example in our sort of range of case studies where this had a benefit to both the local authority and to a developer was Barrett London's engagement for Catford Island. So Lewisham Council had been using Commonplace for 5 years. So there was already a familiarity within the community about the tool, and a positive one at that, because they could see already that the way that Lewisham Council were using it in order to kind of create a more inclusive conversation with some of those more hard to reach groups that Mike touched on, they were already seeing that nice feedback loop. So when Barrett wanted to get greater insight about what the community wanted in their development plan to support their planning application, there was this existing audience there and interested to hear what they had to say. So by having a lot of traction with the councils and having a familiarity within the community about the concept of digital engagement, it means that when developers want to come in, there's that existing audience to have that communication with. So that, there's a few kind of key numbers here, but they achieved over 80% support for the proposal. It went through with no obstacles, which is ultimately...
How does that compare with sort of normal then, 80%?
That is a good question. I mean, overall, across the board, around 66% of our respondents are positive. And
that's higher than you would expect if you didn't have this platform. Is that because you've got more engagement from younger people? I mean, I think that's what people are really keen to find out, whether this almost democratises the consultation process.
Yeah, so if you flick over to the next slide, I think there's some nice infographics around the feedback loop, and that might speak to some of why there was that positivity, because we're looking... So as Mike touched on, the key thing about any kind of digital engagement is to close the loop. People don't want to be just sort of talking into the void. They want to hear that what they have said has been heard and it's been actioned. And we're seeing both local authority and developer really seeing the value in that. And it's sort of getting back to your point of who the audience is, well, the way that our data works is that you can sort of splice it and segment it from different angles. So we can look at what is it that 20 to 30-year-olds want, and how does that differ from the older community, and what can we do so that both of their needs are addressed in any kind of plan. And I think it's that richness of data and the ability to use the platform to aggregate all different data sets. So that blended approach is something that we really support, in that we can marry up the questions that are being asked in those cups of tea with the questions that we're asking digitally. And so you can segment the full set of data. You're not looking at them in isolation. And I think that's sort of something that one of the things I think we'll come on to in this discussion is how can the funding be best used that is available? How can, local authorities which have less resource, how can we help them make the most of it? And it's that sort of thing where no one has to do Excel spreadsheets and pivot tables or anything like that. It's very easy to just look at the different sets of data and be able to email and connect back with the community and have everything in one location, rather than sort of paper forms, emails, all of these different sources of information. It can all be aggregated into the one place. So that was sort of just a really nice example of how the two play together.
It's interesting to have them alongside. So I was going to ask the question, but it's already been answered about whether this would replace sort of physical consultations. But you're not saying that the NIMBYs can't have their say anymore, the older generation, but you're saying that this is a way of getting a truer idea of what's going on, because you're including some of these younger voices who are maybe more inclined to engage in this way.
Yeah, absolutely. Or people that, shift workers, for instance, working in the NHS, they're sleeping when that town hall meeting is on. And how do they get a chance to have their view heard? Likewise, people that are working in jobs which don't allow them to have flexibility, or working from home and things like that, to be able to attend in-person consultations, or perhaps, there's language scenarios there as well. And just sort of the final thing, that one of the things where really developing, which is very exciting, is neuro-language processing, which sounds very like high-tech AI, but we've done a whole lot of work with our data science team to really fine-tune our kind of various algorithms around different types of data sets, so that we can, in terms of an efficiency-making tool for local authority, you go from having someone having to sit there for days on end, kind of trying to distill out, what the sentiment is, to being able to sort of run it through various processes and spit out a report, very, very quickly that gives you that top line information that can be then fed back into the processes that are being undertaken by the council, or by the developer for that matter.
So I think that feeds into to what Paul's going to say, hopefully, about the paradigm shift that's taking place seemingly at local authority level as well when it comes to the digital piece. Paul, tell me a little bit more about what's going on at Southampton. I mean, you've received £225,000, I think, over 2 rounds from this PropTech engagement fund. How are you and other planning authorities now using digital and data to help with the engagement and planning decisions?
Okay, thanks. First of all, I'll give a bit of context. I've been involved in planning for a long time, and I've seen, I think, a number of paradigm shifts in the way we are engaging. From we started off of having hard copy documents that required people to go to visit offices or libraries to see those documents which are on statutory deposit, to online engagement, which started off to replicate some of these processes. You just saw static documents, to now to have these more interactive tools that are actually quite very exciting. And this is for both planning applications and for consultation on development plan documents. So it's across the range of planning that these paradigm shifts have happened. At Southampton at the moment, as you said, we've got these 2 rounds of funding, which we're using to support our city vision local plan engagement processes, but we'll also be looking to move those into the development management world at a later date. The first round of funding, we've started to facilitate online mapping and interactive mapping into our consultation processes to give a much more explicit spatial input to the processes than had previously been the case. We've run a number of phases of this consultation. Essentially, the first one was a questionnaire, which would start asking questions such as, how supportive are you of more high-rise buildings within the city to meet our housing needs? But with the mapping tools we've got, we now be able to ask the questions in a much more refined way, like, if you think high-rise buildings are appropriate, which parts of the city, spatially, is it more appropriate? Is it appropriate for those types of development? So it's a much more nuanced type of engagement which we're enabled to have. We're using the second round of funding to take that a stage further, to integrate 3D modelling within our consultations, so you can actually start to visualize a model of the city or parts of the city, and actually start to see what would happen if we did start, for example, to submit or develop high-rise buildings in this part of the city, actually visualize through the city scene what these may look like and what the impact may be. So again, that additional level of knowledge, intelligence, and information that consultees can have to enable them to respond from an informed position. And as far as development management concerns, I'm looking for the time when developers are encouraged or even have to submit 3D models of their proposals, such that those can be presented to planning committees with this model of the city to see the impact. So that's how we're using the funding at the moment and where the direction of travel. However, like other speakers, I think that digital is just one means of engagement. Face-to-face discussions and our cups of tea or coffee are still invaluable, and I certainly hope the latter aren't taken away. But that is important, because I think that purely digital engagement can often be without context, and there's importance of getting some of that context over to people rather than just the cold digital data-driven world. Equally important, where we are digital, is making people aware of where they can find those online resources. So all very well putting them out there on the web, but you need to make sure people are aware that they're there. And I'm reminded of my partner, who was a web designer for small businesses, designing these wonderful websites for businesses, and then them saying, but you've built this website, I've got no customers. And the question was, where are you advertising? How are you making people aware of the website? It says, essentially, you've set your shop up in the field. We don't want to go into that. But thirdly, I think is more importantly, being digital, online technology and data-driven does not make good engagement. We need to look at how our documents are presented, how our policy documents, how our planning applications are presented. They need to be accessible to everybody. We are planners. Some of us are planners or development professionals. We write in a specific way. We write to meet statutory guidance. That doesn't necessarily mean they're accessible to the layperson. And that's what we need to do, make our documents accessible if our online engagement or our non-online engagement is going to be successful. And in the back of the mind, as alluded to previously, not everybody can or does want to engage digitally, and we need to facilitate those as well. So I think that's a whistle-stop tour of where I've seen the changes in the planning system over 30-odd years, but also where we're going in Southampton, and I think some of the challenges that face the digital engagement world.
So it's basically a very exciting additional tool to broaden engagement. I think you summed it up perfectly there. Let's hear about it from the developer's perspective. Lucille, how do the likes of Lendlease use data and digital platforms to deliver impactful projects that are actually truly embraced by the community?
Thank you. Nice to see everybody and great to be here. Thank you. So Lendlease have been using a number of different mechanisms, digital and in person. And I think first of all, I'd like to address the point that by no measure do we ever intend to minimise or to disregard physical, practical, face-to-face engagement, because it is absolutely integral to our overall success. But that said, and particularly throughout COVID, we found it incredibly useful having alternative mechanisms through which to engage with people in a variety of in a variety of areas and in a variety of different ways. And I think for us, the key is being able to reach audiences that typically don't seek to engage with us in a face-to-face capacity, and for various reasons, Cleo's mentioned a number of them today, either can't or have less ability to do that. And this provides us with a really solid mechanism that we are able to then hear those voices. And beyond just hearing those voices, it allows us a route to begin having a conversation and to hear from those people. And what we tend to do with that information is then seek out further opportunities for engagement as a result. So we are doing some really innovative work at the moment with an academic institution, which shall remain nameless. But what we are seeking to do through them is to understand people's perceptions of prosperity within their local area. And through that activity, we are then taking those findings and embedding those into the activities that we curate as part of the statutory planning process, but also as part of our ongoing engagement processes thereafter. And I come at this from a slightly different perspective, in that statutory engagement is a very small piece of the pie for me and my team. So we seek to develop enduring relationships with our communities over many, many years, sometimes up to 30 or 40 years. And those take time and they take effort and they take authenticity, and you need to be able to feed back and prove that you have done what you said you would do. And so being able to use data and being able to use platforms, digital platforms, to support those messages has been for us incredibly helpful.
Thanks very much for that. Okay, well, that's some really interesting pieces of scene setting there, I think. Let's sort of ask some questions now across the panel. This one's to Mike, actually. How can digital platforms help support local planning teams who are really struggling on the resourcing front?
Thanks, Liz. So I think, via the PropTech Engagement Fund, we've been doing a lot of work with local authorities, and some of it's about introducing new technology that's tremendously valuable. 3D has been mentioned. It's not a new technology in of itself, but I think in terms of making 3D accessible to the public in the context of planning is quite new, and I think it's really, really super helpful. And we've also done a lot of work around new ways of engaging. So, people are used to doing lots of stuff via voice at the moment. You can now leave a comment as a voice note on Commonplace, as well as typing a response. So we're quite interested in kind of lowering the barrier to engagement using those kind of techniques. We've been doing a lot of work around design codes, which is part of is being kind of promoted as part of the new legislation, using lots of interactive maps, data layers, being able to show new plans on top of a map, being able to demonstrate how plans are responding to problems that are conveyed through data, whether that be, stuff to do with, it might be to do with pollution, or it might be to do with different demographic groups. And I think there's some really, really nice ways of using that data to tell the story of what the problem is that the design solution is solving, and getting people to be part of that discussion with the kind of information they need to do it. And then Cleo mentioned NLP, which is a form of AI that can be used to understand the comments that people have made. And we're starting to make some really interesting use of that now. It's a technology that has to be trained. And in order to train it, you need to have a lot of data. And we now have a lot of data across various different applications that local government and developers are using our platform for. So we're able to train the technology quite well, which means that we can get much more nuanced and valuable information out of looking at those kind of that sort of text data. And then finally, we've one of the things we've done recently, which I think is actually really exciting, is that we've reinvented the planning notices process in a digital format. We've worked with a couple of councils on this, and as Paul was mentioning, one of the problems with the planning process is that the documents that all of the information are contained within are really hard to access, and everybody will be familiar with the little notice on the lamppost that everybody ignores. It doesn't need to be like that, and we've brought that up into the 21st century with an app that you can get on your phone, which has all of the information very, very visually. It allows you to drop into 3D to see the context, to view images, to make comments directly. And I think that could become quite an exciting part of the way that the whole planning process works.
Paul, I mean, is that sort of resonating with you? Have you used this sort of service, or are you thinking there are bits and pieces that you'd like to see that are not yet being delivered?
We're using bits and pieces of that. I think one of the challenges is, as we move towards more and greater engagement, but in that engagement needs to be meaningful, it's just having the capacity, the tools and the skills behind the scenes to actually process that, to take those informed decisions, be they into plan making or development management decisions. And that, I think, is one of the challenges we face with a shortage of planning officers. Plus, we're also having to bring in engagement specialists, and if we're using our AI tools, NLP tools, is that expertise as well. So it's increasing that capacity requirements to make a meaningful and engaged planning service.
It's kind of a bit of a balancing act, isn't it? Because you actually need to have the resource to be able to deploy
absolutely,
these.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's where I think the uncertainty around street level referenda. What does that mean? What does that mean resources? What does that mean around decision making? And what expectations are we building up for residents to be able to say yay or nay to development? What happens if they continually say nay, yet we're still under pressure to build more houses, for example?
So you're not a big fan of the street votes? I think
that mentioned before is the lack of detail coming out of the bill. But even by putting that into the bill, you're building up an expectation. And my concern is, to what extent are we building up an expectation that at street level we have control, we have the say, but where does that fit in with the overall needs of the local authority area, whether it's city, town, village? And I think that's what the planning profession is there for, to make those informed balances and those informed decisions or recommendations, which are perhaps more nuanced than the simple yes or no of a street level referenda. And that's my concern. We don't know the detail. But
that's the problem, isn't it? The detail's just not there at the moment. So it's then open to interpretation, which is somewhat dangerous when, it could be quite dangerous. Cleo, tell us a little bit more about the design code side of thing and what role that they might play in future development.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of talk at the moment about kind of the social value proposition. And I think the design codes that have been outlined do form some sort of part of that wider discussion. And there's sort of 10 kind of key characteristics that I think the bill is sort of talking about. And then sort of 3 overarching themes, which are climate, character, and community. So I think, using a combination of in-person discussions as well as visual tools to help distill out from a community what those key things mean to them. What does that look like? Because each community is different. And I think, very much to Paul's point, it's important to be able to have these sort of more micro discussions within communities, but have these bigger organizations and authorities having a more holistic overview and being able to, I feel that our place as a digital platform can help to be the conduit from those micro conversations through to the experts that can have that overarching holistic view of how these kind of what a well-designed place is and how that can be rolled out, knowing, against the backdrop of what other infrastructure projects are going on or major planning decisions. So I'm sort of, very much with Paul on the sort of isolated vote doesn't necessarily sound like it would cover off all of that and ultimately, feed into the designed code well. And the other thing I was going to mention, back to one of Paul's points about the shop in a field, which I just love that analogy. I'm definitely going to use that. But we found that one of our biggest way that the engagements are shared is via WhatsApp, which I think is really interesting because that's very personal. Like once you get into those community groups, the biggest way it's being shared is via WhatsApp. So it's not necessarily like those social media channel pushers or it's people sending it to other people, which I think tells you so much about how people care about their communities now, sort of to Mike's earliest point about post-COVID, where so much more, for the first time, many of us spent time in our community. We stopped rushing off to life and actually had to spend time in it and therefore had this greater understanding of what it meant to be the community. So I think there's just a lot
That's so interesting about the WhatsApp. It's almost as though community means family and friends, doesn't it?
Well, absolutely. Yeah. And you think, and if someone sent you it, you're much more likely it's not just landed in your inbox cold or come up as an ad that you might scroll past. Your friend from your walking group has sent you it about something that's happening in the parks that you go walking in. Well, you're much more likely to click on it and engage and think, oh, well, so-and-so is engaged. I think I should as well. So that's how I think we can start to sit with it. And I think as we amass, this big data set, we can start to benchmark what it means to be a well-designed place in different parts of the country. And therefore, does that feed into the levelling up piece of where in the country, if you could ask the same sort of design-led questions to different parts of the country, do you start to get like a really interesting view of where places need to sort of be improved, I suppose?
It's an interesting one, isn't it? I mean, imagine if planning went viral suddenly and suddenly every kind of application had this raft of interest. How do you ensure that it's people in the local community that are actually contributing to this and not other people sort of jumping in? I mean, I'm thinking if there was a controversial application where there are groups that are against that side of that kind of development, like a fracking application or something. How do you kind of validate the data? I don't know who wants to take this. I mean, I guess this could be from both sides of the fence. I want to know how sort of reassured Paul is and how organisations like Commonplace can guarantee that it is actually locals that are feeding back.
I might flick that one to Mike.
Mike?
Side.
Will I come to Paul after?
Sure, yeah, I'm very happy to answer that. So we have quite a lot of validation built into the platform. The first line, if you like, is that only somebody who has validated their email address by receiving email, clicking through on the link, is included in the data set that's used publicly. We collect demographic data, so we collect postcode by default, and we flag if there's a kind of mysterious number of responses from single postcode. So we have quite a lot of good data to be able to look at whether there's anything suspicious that might be happening.
Okay.
Commonplace it's been used on some very, very, not on fracking, I have to say, but on some very controversial applications. We also we have a lot of technology kind of at the back end that looks for other strange or anomalous types of activity that flags to us if any of those things are happening.
Okay.
So there's lots of things that you can do, and we can even collect the IP address of the individual computer if that's needed, which in very occasionally that sort of level of security is needed.
Well, that's good to hear. I mean, Paul, are you reassured by that?
Yes, that technology is there. But I think it's important we have that validation process, but equally be aware that for some major applications, almost anybody can comment. That's the way the planning system works. I spent some time at much of my career at Luton, and at one stage we had an application for a new football stadium. And the football club were very canny in encouraging their supporters to submit representations in support of the application to the council. And we received over 10,000 representations in support. And they were from all over the world. Luton Town, believe it or not, have a supporters club in sort of for Wheedon, for example. So the way we were reporting that to members, we were seeking an address or postcode within all representations, be they hard copy or electronic. So we were able to report to members the proportion of those that came in from within the town, proportion of those that came within Bedfordshire area, the proportion of those that came elsewhere within the UK, and the proportion that came overseas, just to give that measure of support or otherwise.
So you get quite a granular picture, actually.
So you build up a very granular picture where postcodes were postcodes were given. Can I just pick up on a point that Mike raised earlier about taking away the traditional notice on the lamppost?
Yeah.
I think we can perhaps combine those, because I've been in instances where we've had complaints because the development has happened and people haven't seen the sign on the lamppost. Perhaps we could combine the two with the notice on the lamppost having a QR code which enables you to go from the mobile phone directly into the data and the 3D representation and be able to take the comment. So we effectively get the best of both worlds.
That's what we've
That's a bit of an idea there, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what we've actually done, Paul.
Oh, have you? Excellent.
Yeah.
He'll pay you the fiver later.
Maybe.
Okay, good. So tell me a little bit about the PropTech Engagement Fund, Paul, quickly. I mean, how sort of meaningful has that been to you? It's a big chunk of change, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a big chunk of change. We wanted to be, as has been said earlier, some of the things we're doing in terms of the technology isn't innovative, but it's the way we're trying to use that technology, which I think is being innovative. It's the first time in Southampton, for example, we've put that interactive mapping ability for people to actually comment on a consultation around a local plan, for example. We see that we haven't deployed it yet, but the 3D modelling element we think is very, very exciting. With the even just having the digital model of the city being excited, but the ability to sort of drop in development options in those areas is as I said before, is another phase in what we're trying to do to enable that much more meaningful, much more informed level of engagement. And I guess that's, as I see it, that is the way, the data-driven, evidence-based, putting the data out there, putting the information out there to enable those who are interested in responding to do it from a much more informed position.
Informed, and it's the accessibility, I think, that you've really highlighted.
And that's my point. It's informed and being accessible. That's the key things.
Yeah. And Lucille, there are still some huge challenges there, aren't there, in terms of modernising the planning system. What are they, and how can they be overcome, in your view?
Oh,
big
gosh.
Question. Sorry.
I could speak for hours on issues.
Pick one. Pick the biggest challenge that you think's there.
Oh, gosh. For us, coming from my perspective, again, coming at this from a slightly different angle to other panelists, one of the issues with planning for us, looking at this through a social value or social impact lens, is the local nature, or the hyper local nature of planning, and we appreciate and understand fully why that is the case, but it causes myriad problems. And as what we are noticing now is that as we are moving to a position of having to deliver significant social value outcomes as a result of, for example, Section 106 agreements, that is becoming much more difficult to achieve with that very localised, hyperlocal connection, and that's really problematic. In years gone by, probably less so, but what we're seeing now, particularly with the state of the economic market at the moment, and with that being fairly buoyant, finding opportunities to source and secure labour, for example, is particularly challenging. So looking forward to seeing where we land on that particular issue. There are lots of different things in play, so I'm confident that it won't remain problematic for too much longer, let's hope.
So what do you want to see happen then to kind of overcome that issue?
So I think in an ideal world, we would be able to find a way to democratise our approach to delivery of social value that is still place-based, but that has more capacity to work in a similar way to the way that humans work. They don't exist within a borough boundary. They cross in between and over and through quite a bit of the time. And what we don't always have the capacity to do is support people in the way that we would like because of those restrictions. So I'd like to see some of that being more fluid and more relaxed, so that we could wrap our arms around them a bit more fully.
Okay, and what about the sort of importance of data collation and when you're reviewing planning and consultations, and how can that be used with future opportunities? Can you answer that one as well, Lucille?
Yeah, sure. So I think, again, sort of referencing some of the work that we are doing with academic partners, we're taking learnings from our overall engagement strategies within local places, and we are using those learnings and those data sources to inform our decision making as an organisation. So Lendlease has a corporate purpose of together creating places where communities can thrive, and we can only really do that with a strong evidence base, and then with opportunities to co-create and to work in partnership with local communities. So the data sets that we are gathering and that we have collected have really helped us to inform on our strategies and our processes, and opportunities to seek out different engagements with different audiences.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks for that. Okay, and we're now going to see if we've got any questions from the audience to put to the panel. What have we got here? Actually, it's a very good question here. It was put a little while ago, so I hope Anonymous is still on. Do the panel think all developments should have to engage digitally with the public as part of the consultation process? Who wants to take this one? Anyone? Volunteers? Mike?
Yes, I do. In short, I mean, I definitely don't think
you would say that though, wouldn't you?
I would say that, but I definitely don't think it should be something that's in any way elevated above any other form of consultation. But I think it should be offered for every development as part of the ways that people might want to respond. I think if you're not doing that, then you're dramatically reducing the democratic opportunity for everybody to respond, because we know that if you engage digitally, you can get much more reach. And I think that's an important part, but not the only part of consultation.
Okay. Does anybody think there are any exceptions, though, where you really don't need to go to that level? Or are we all sort of advocates? I mean, I'm guessing we're all advocates here of an element of digital engagement. Or Paul, I mean, where are the limitations, perhaps?
I think it's under the current planning regime. It's great putting those application details out there, but it's what scope have people got to comment on them, particularly if we're talking around some of the permitted development prior notification schemes. So it's having that. It's almost parallel with the street referendum. We're putting things out there, but how we manage people's expectations as to what they can and cannot object to, and the impact that will have, for example. I think that's the important thing. Yes, consultation should be digital, but it's just one channel. Let's manage the expectations as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I'm also keen. I mean, you talked about the the cost of and the resourcing issue earlier. We know that costs are going up, don't we? Planning application fees are going up something like 35%, I think. Spending on planning resources has dwindled by close to 15%. To what extent will digital engagement help mitigate that sort of dual cost pressure or resourcing pressure? Paul, I'm going to ask you that very quickly and obviously first, and then I'll come to one of the others.
I don't know whether it will. We're actually putting information out there, and the almost expectation is that people will engage, potentially more people will engage. In terms of the resource to actually fulfill the planning function, it might not change. But I think that's where we have to look at our overall business processes to see if we can drive down and use, I've been trained in lean principles, removing waste from our business processes. It may be that we have to bring in its additional or different expertise within the planning function. Well, the point has been made about data. We're collecting lots of data. That implies that planners have to be perhaps a bit more aware than they have been around principles of data governance and data quality. It raises questions about data accessibility and availability. Again, in a previous role, we were receiving data from the CAA around airport safety zones, which was confidential. That type of information should be out there in the public domain to support consultations and engagements on planning decisions. So it's not just, I think, the planning profession, it's some of those additional things that a digital world requires us to have, and that quality of data, quality of understanding, and open data as well. So I think it's not just, yes, we go digital, therefore we can change the resource requirements within planning services. We can't actually reduce the resources, but we have to use different resources in different ways.
Yeah. So okay. I mean, it's about really understanding how to kind of deploy the data and have the resource the right resource, but not going overboard on the resource, I suppose. What about? So I think close your ears, Mike and Cleo. What are the other downsides to digital and digital platforms? Lucille, can I bring you in here, please?
Yeah, of course. So the most obvious is the digital exclusion issue, and being able to ensure that you are cognizant of the fact that not all people will either be willing nor able to engage with a digital platform. Being cognizant of that and then being able to mitigate that where possible is key. And this is why I keep coming back to the point that it's this. We view this very much as one tenet to a much more holistic approach to wider engagement. So it, for us at least, it does, digital engagement doesn't, and it was never intended to stand alone. Because of those issues, and because we are working on urbanisation projects which have high prevalence of those sorts of issues, and in many cases we are working directly with local organisations and groups to tackle those issues. So being aware of them and being able to put alternatives into place for us is absolutely key to a whole complete cohesive programme.
Yeah, and sort of essentially understanding that some people will never want to engage digitally and being sort of accepting of that and including them in a different way.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I think what we've all agreed, though, that digital clearly plays an important part already now and is going to play a growing role going forward. I've got one final question for, somebody's come in with a question from the audience now, right at the critical moment. Have I got time to do this and ask you all? I'm going to ask one of you this question. Do speakers think, or are there stats examples to show that digital engagement gets a more positive response from the people? And this picks up on what I asked earlier, actually. Perhaps because more people can be engaged from further afield, or because a younger demographic are more positive about developments. Cleo, do you want to take that one?
The answer is yes, is what we've sort of found. Because you're getting, like we've all said, that broader response from the community rather than just the loud voice of a few. You get that broader response, and I think it's all about and sort of somewhat to the previous question a little bit, whether there's a downside. I think a downside I could certainly see is if the quality of the digital engagement is not there, then and that we feel we position ourselves as a kind of best practice, organisation. We are doing this because we care about opening up that line of conversation with community, not just about profit. And I think that's really key. And I think that could be a downside to digital engagement if there is sort of too much flooding with a less considered questions and things like that. And that would create an environment of fatigue around the concept and just create more work for Paul's team, really. You want really considered questions that pull out the right information.
The word I think that's been used by several of you actually is nuanced. And there's an opportunity to get that more nuanced picture, but you have to ask a nuanced question to elicit that, don't you?
Exactly.
But I think it's a good point.
Yeah.
I've got a final question now for all of you. Very, very quick on the answers because we're quite tight on time now. What do you think will be the single biggest driver of change for the planning system going forward, and what impact will it have? Can I start with Lucille?
Yes, in a couple of sentences, probably the economic transformation, COVID, Brexit, a combination of all three of those things. People, as has already been mentioned, people are much more informed and are seeking to be much more informed on this agenda coming out of the pandemic. And I think that is right. And I think that's positive. And I think that will be transformative.
Great answer. Mike?
I think it'll be about democratising the planning system, which, whether or not the policy works exactly as it's written, I'm not sure. But I think people are more interested in planning because they're more aware of it. They're more interested in the place that they live, and they know that they can have more influence on it. And so there's a real opportunity there that, I think that's an opportunity to be embraced. And that's certainly why we're in this business, and I think it could have a tremendous effect.
It would be great if it could be truly democratised, wouldn't it? Cleo?
Yeah, sure. I hope that climate change has an impact, and, the climate and the community aspect of those design codes. I think the only way, especially in the big cities, that we can tackle it is as a community, and how that interacts with the planning process, I think has to start to work really well. There's obviously steps and measures going in that direction. But for me, whether that's what the biggest thing will be, what I would like it to be is probably the climate crisis, and how as communities and as planning with that holistic view can start to achieve some of those meaningful changes.
I mean, that would be awesome if that happened, wouldn't it? Who next? Oh, it's Paul. I think you're the last, but not the least.
Thanks. I pick up on all those points, and I think the economy post-COVID, the experience through COVID and the environment, climate change are going to be the drivers. And linked in with that is that expectation that people can have a real say in the shaping of their places, be they local area streets or city-wide or regional-wide. I think that's where the direction of travel is, which is the democratisation of the system.
And it is going to be enabled, isn't it, by digital? I think nobody here would dispute that. And I think that could make for actually much more favourable decisions that are made for as far as the property industry is concerned. So, I mean, it could be really, really good news all round. You get a more considered response. And back to that word, the two words I think that sort of leapt out at me today, democratisation and nuanced. Which I think were a very sort of powerful concept. Thank you ever so much to our panel and to the audience today. There are plenty of practical takeaways there, I thought, as well as important insights. I'm just now going to hand over to Bonnie to say a few final words.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you to our panel and our partners for this session, Commonplace, for a really interesting and very well-timed discussion. It was a great panel, and thank you for being part of it. The end of this panel is also the finale of Real Estate Live for June 2022. We've had a fantastic week of debate and discussion, including our in-person investor summit in Liverpool. And within the next few days, you'll be able to watch all the panel sessions from this week back via the Real Estate Live UK YouTube channel and on the website, which is good news for some of the people that have been messaging in the chat after this panel. So they will all be available to watch back and to share with colleagues and friends. So make sure you follow us on LinkedIn for more updates on future activity coming up in the autumn. But for now, thank you again to all the partners that have been involved in bringing this week of events together, particularly the Liverpool Place Partnership and, of course, our host for this panel, Commonplace. And thank you all once again for joining us this afternoon. We look forward to seeing you again soon.